Thomas Aquinas, he was back in the Middle Ages, right? And he was a philosopher. He said, there should be men who devote their lives to contemplation. Interesting, isn't it? How often do we sit around and contemplate? Are we too busy to contemplate? And so he said, there should be men who devote their lives to contemplation. He said, not only for the good of the individual, but for the good of the human society. Look at this. Now, how often have we heard that stuff on the evening news? Has anybody heard that kind of stuff? So we go back in and you study these historical growth, the dimensions of growth. And you also can look at historical declines. And you can connect it. And here's one of the things that I went to. I went to the Renaissance because everybody thinks of inventions, art, right? Those kind of things around the Renaissance. There was a direct connection between the printing press and reading in 1400. Now, if you think about it, let's just evaluate that. Reading. Who is too busy to read in today's world? Isn't that true? How often have you met people that, for whatever reason, said they were too busy to read? And that's our society today. Welcome. That's just the way it is. I said that. I remember meeting a guy early on, and he asked me if I would be willing to read, and I said, no, I was too busy. I was like that. I was a product of my culture. How many people have seen that type of stuff? And so the question then becomes, if reading is limited, what is the ramifications for reading? Think about the ramifications for not reading of a culture. Think about this. No thinking. Do you think that might be important? That could be a big one, right? Could there be potentially some indicators that we're witnessing in our culture today as a link to not reading? Isn't that interesting? So we look at it, reading is a direct connection to thinking, which directly connects us to what we call ideas. And then from ideas, if you look at the Greeks and the classics, that's what they did. They discussed ideas. And then from there, what happens is there's what they call innovation and creativity. Because from ideas, it leads to that. And then what happens is, after you have ideas that lead to creativity, what is the fallout of that? The fallout of that is industry, prosperity. How many people think those things might be important right about now? Right? I've made a list of some of the things that came out of the Renaissance after the printing press. And don't forget, there was some connections to the printing press to the Greek classics in the Renaissance. Because what happened was, with the overthrowing of the Constantinople, there was an overthrowing of Constantinople and an invasion of Constantinople. And right on the edge of the invasion, all of the Greek scholars fled. The bigger Greek scholars fled, right? It's like, if things get bad enough in our country, where are you going? Do you have a trip tracker? Costa Rica doesn't sound too bad sometimes, right? So if you think about it, the Greeks fled and they went into Europe. And what'd they bring with them? They brought all the manuscripts with them. Connect that with the printing press. Look at all the stuff that kind of fits in. Everything kind of fits in here. They brought all the manuscripts. And one of the biggest poet philosophers that's represented his name with the Renaissance, how many people are familiar with Francesco Plutarch? Patriarch. Francesco Patriarch. And so Francesco Patriarch got a hold of what? All of the original works of Cicero. He got a hold of all the original works of Cicero. What was Cicero doing? Cicero was a major orator in Rome at the fall of the Republic, trying to preserve freedom and peace. And so he got all this stuff, and he started getting all this culture and this reading going on in Renaissance. And so what happened was we saw innovation, we saw art, we saw industry. Look at the ramifications from this. Look at here, I just listed the ramifications from this. Increased cloth production. Increased cloth production that included silks and wools. So all of a sudden, that whole trade began to flourish. Markets began to flourish. From markets, after they began to flourish, think about this. Economic investments began to flourish. There was a flow of increased prosperity from money transference. There was symbols and signs of early capitalism. Commerce expanded everywhere, including maritime commerce. You've heard of the spice trade. You've heard of the shipping routes. Some of the biggest cultures that had seafaring cultures came out of that. And so you had this massive prosperity linked to the concept of taking the time for leisure to read.